Species. Unite.
That's taxpayers' money that is going to support research and development and pilot projects to develop a food system that is based on environmental destruction and greed and disregard for animals, fish, and any of the other marine mammals that might be around it.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Novogratz. This is Species Unite. This conversation is with Andrianna Natsoulas. Andrianna is the campaigns director for Don't Cage Our Oceans. Don't Cage Our Oceans exists to keep our oceans free from industrial fish farms. Until I met Andrianna, I had no idea that any of this was a threat or a possibility. Hi, Andrianna.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here and speak with you.
I really want to talk about offshore finfish farming in the USA because I had no idea this was even a thing until I talked to you a month or two ago about it. I know things aren't actually getting better in the world of industrial agriculture and CAFOs and all these things that are like absolutely horrific to the planet as well as people and animals. But as soon as you are not paying enough attention, you don't realize like there's more coming. And so before we get into it though, why don't you just say who you are, what you do, and how you got here?
So I'm Andrianna Natsoulas. I'm the campaign director with Don't Cage Our Oceans. And Don't Cage Our Oceans is a coalition of organizations and businesses fighting offshore fish farming while uplifting sustainable seafood systems. And so how did I get here? I've been working on marine issues, fisheries issues, policies, campaigns for close to 30 years now, which is a little bit scary to think about. And in the mid-2000s, I did work on a very similar campaign when I was at Food and Water Watch and Public Citizen, where I pulled together a coalition of primarily environmental organizations to fight offshore fish farming in the United States. And at that time, we were really focused on federal policies. And it's the same things that we're seeing now that were in existence then, except the industry has gained power.
Explain exactly what offshore finfish farming is.
Mm-hmm. So offshore fish farming, in the United States, we have different jurisdictions over our waters. And so from 0 to 3 miles out from the coast in marine waters in the oceans is state jurisdiction. So states create the policies to be able to oversee and manage activities within those 0 to 3 miles. Offshore, the way that we talk about it, is in federal waters. So that's from 3.01 miles to 200 miles offshore. So when we're talking about offshore finfish farms, we're talking about these massive submerged cages that are growing finfish. That's fish with a fin. So you think about salmon is a finfish, although those fish have not been grown in those kind of cages. They've been closer to shore and coastal waters. But salmon's a finfish. Almaco jack's a finfish. Any fish with a fin and scale, those are finfish. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about offshore finfish farming. And it's really important to make that distinction because those are carnivorous animals. So they eat other fish. You don't feed them just on a vegetable diet. And that's significant because one of the problems, which I'll get into, is what they are being fed. And they are being fed other fish. And so in a really general way, that's what we're talking about with offshore finfish farming, submerged cages way out, and you say that you hadn't heard of it before, out of sight, out of mind. Who knows what's going on that far offshore? You really don't know unless you're a fisherman fishing out beyond 3 miles, unless you're on the waters, unless you are seeing the repercussions of them from the coast. And that is what we are really concerned about.
When you say they're massive, like how big are they?
Well, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of fish those are the proposals. So currently there is not a finfish farm in federal waters in the United States because there is no regulatory system to allow them. The permitting system is really confusing. There's confusion amongst the different agencies, which I can also get into, of how the administration had tried to simplify who actually does oversee it. So there are not yet any in the federal waters because of the confusion around permitting. The economic cost, I mean, if you can just imagine the costs associated with having and maintaining submerged cages. And then environmentally, there's still uncertainty. Are they actually viable in federal waters in those deep seas? But currently, there are several proposed sites. So these are sites that have started the permitting process with the various agencies, with the federal government. So we have one off of New Hampshire, one off of the southern side of Long Island, Manna Farms. They also have a proposed site off of the northern Gulf Coast of Florida. And then there's another one called Valella Epsilon, which is off of Sarasota, Florida, down in the south. And then there's another proposed site off of San Diego, about 4 miles off of San Diego. And then off the coast of Hawaii, there are a couple of submerged cages like what is proposed for the federal waters, because the coastal waters, the state waters of Hawaii, are really, really deep. And so they're more similar to what is being proposed in the federal waters, deep submerged Almacook finfish farming. We describe them as floating CAFOs.
Say what a CAFO is, just because some people won't.
Yep. For people who have followed industrial agriculture on land, these massive farms are called concentrated animal feeding operations. So that's when you have hundreds, thousands of, for example, cows or pigs in very, very confined areas, and their sole purpose is to raise protein for consumption fast and cheap. And those land-based CAFOs, there's been a lot of tracking. There's been a lot of fighting against them. And these are on land. You can drive past them. I have driven past pig CAFOs and dairy CAFOs. You can see these animals shoved together. Anything that's concentrated where you have a lot of animals close together, there's increased stress amongst the animals. There's grave concerns over animal welfare in these situations. There are grave concerns around worker safety as well and the treatment of the workers. And then there's also in these land-based systems a lot of antibiotics that are used to prevent the spread of disease. Take that model, put it offshore. So we call them floating CAFOs. And the worst thing about it, and one of the many, many worst things about it, is that they're out of sight, out of mind. You can't see them. You can't just drive by them. And so also with these land-based CAFOs, there's a great concern around pollution from waste from the animals. It's the same thing in the oceans. I mean, it's the same system. And it's also now one of the differences from what I saw in the mid-2000s to what I see now is that it's the same players now promoting and supporting and throwing money into these offshore floating CAFOs. So you have Cargill, which has been a huge player in industrial land-based agriculture. They have a monopoly over corn production, soy production. They have destroyed hundreds of thousands of acres in the Amazon to grow corn and soy, often of which is genetically modified. They are now promoting and throwing money into creating these offshore fish farms. Why? Because they want to have a corner in the feed market. So as I had mentioned at the beginning, these carnivorous finfish, these carnivorous animals eat fish. But they also, the companies, the corporations that are pursuing this to decrease the expense of the wild fish feed, they mix it with corn, soy, and canola. So who owns that corn, soy, and canola? Cargill. Another player that is promoting the development of our floating CAFOs there in the federal waters is Merck Pharmaceuticals. Because as I described, when you see these land-based CAFOs, all these animals together, there's a spread of disease. So you have to apply antibiotics. And so who has the corner of that market? Merck. Another corporate entity that has been anting up to push that kind of industrial food production forward is Cisco. And Cisco has cornered the market of distribution. So it's the same players. They've been so successful on land, and now they want to increase their profits at the expense of the environment and animals and workers and move offshore where we can't see them.
Wow. Now, does this exist in other countries?
It doesn't it's really economically, environmentally difficult. It's very challenging. In China, we see them being a pioneer in developing really high-tech submerged cages. But in other countries, they've been keeping their eye on coastal systems and coastal finfish farms because it's more economical.
Okay.
It's easier to manage them with barges and with workers having a land-based infrastructure. And so it's really ridiculous. It is just so ridiculous to even fathom that this could be some sort of, quote, sustainable food production system. And that's exactly what the proponents are claiming it is. They blue wash. So again, we hear that term on land-based systems. We hear greenwashing, where proponents of industrial systems kind of paint a pretty picture, say that it's going to feed the poor, it's going to clean up the environment with market-based solutions. That same rhetoric, that same narrative is being applied to these industrial fish farms, and we call it blue washing. And so they've been really good at blue washing the proliferation of primarily salmon farms, and then also some what we call branzino here in the supermarkets and the restaurants, which is actually sea bream and sea bass. And so the industry does a really good job in saying that this is going to feed the world. This is going to decrease pressure on wild fish populations. But in fact, and I'll get into this as well again with the fish feed issue, which is one of the biggest problems, it's not a solution. It's adding to the problem. And so they're really trying to build up this as a solution in the coastal fish farms and then try to move them offshore where they're farther away. You can't see them. So that was a very long answer to your short question of, does this exist in other countries? China so far is the one that we've seen really develop the technology. In other countries, it's still coastal, but they're putting all their little chairs in a row to try to persuade the public that this is a good idea.
Obviously, anytime you can find this many animals in a small space, whether it's in the ocean or on land, it's terrible for the animals, but also for the environment. So what do you know about what this will do to the ocean, to the environment?
Boy, where to even start? Let's start with just the pure environment. As I mentioned, there's a lot of antibiotics that are used. There are also algicides and pesticides. Algicides and pesticides for some of the other growth that may happen on the cages. Those chemicals disperse into the surrounding environment. They don't. There's this old saying of dilution. Dilution is the solution to pollution. That's just nonsense. And so you have all these chemicals that are being used. You have the antibiotics that are being fed to the fish. You have the fish waste, which if you're having hundreds of thousands of carnivorous animals in one place, you can just imagine what the waste looks like. And so that is just dispersing into, it's not diluting, it's dispersing into the surrounding marine environment and causing a lot of harm. There have been evidential photos of the marine floor beneath one of these farms, and it's just gone. There's no life. It's dead. The pollution kills the marine life around these farms, below these farms. One of the farms I had mentioned that there are a couple submerged farms off the coast of Hawaii, and there have been lawsuits in the past about the cost to coral reefs and how they've killed surrounding coral reefs as a result of these fish farms. So that's one problem, is just simply directly the environmental impact. There's also the concern of the disease, the sea lice that these fish that are being grown in very close quarters just pass around to each other. The sea lice literally eat these animals while they're swimming in circles, and I've seen photos of their skin, seeing exposed skin, exposed flesh as a result of the sea lice. And so there are chemicals that are applied to try to deal with the sea lice. We have seen that has not been successful. There are still extremely high levels of sea lice. There's also extremely high levels of mortality, up to 15% of mortality of the farmed fish because of the disease and the sea lice. Another concern that we have is that the disease and sea lice can spread to the wild fish populations. These are open systems. And so the disease can literally move on currents to reach wild fish populations. The sea lice can latch on to other fish in the surrounding environment. So it just exacerbates the problems that wild fish populations are already feeling with problems like climate change. And so the other issue that I really, really want to talk about is fish feed.
Yeah.
And the impact that fish feed has overall in our natural environment, wild fish populations, and on coastal communities. Wild fish are being taken out of the ocean, then ground up, mixed with other antibiotics, mixed with, as I already mentioned, the corn, soy, the fillers, the corn, soy, and canola. And the wild fish are smaller fish, lower on the food chain of the marine ecosystem, which means that other marine organisms, animals need those fish to grow, to survive. And so they're removing an essential part of the marine ecosystem just to grind it up and to feed to these carnivorous finfish. And so that is putting a great amount of pressure on wild fish populations. And that's putting a lot of pressure on other, like, let's say, whales or dolphins that need those fish to survive. The other human impact that has is a lot of these smaller fish are being taken from coastal communities in sub-Saharan Africa. And so there is a good documentary about this called Until the End of the Earth.
I watched it. It's awesome.
That really illustrates how these fish are being taken out of the waters. They're being sent directly to the fish feed processing facilities, ground up, to be sent not to feed the Africans that they were removed from the oceans from, but to feed the fish that are being grown in Norway or Iceland or Scotland or in the United States or Chile, primarily for consumption of people in the global north. So this is not a solution to the world's hunger. This is making the problem worse. And specifically, to follow through with this example, traditionally what would happen is the men would go out, they would fish. They would bring it to shore. The women would buy the fish and then sell it at the local markets. So that was giving economic opportunities to women, and that was keeping the protein in the local communities. But now the industrial fish feed facilities, if they're not using their own boats, they're paying the fishermen so much more than what the local communities can pay them. And so they sell to the facilities, which really leaves the women economically vulnerable because they no longer have their own economic source. And so it's just this tumble effect of destroying the environment, destroying communities, destroying local access to food and protein, destroying local food sovereignty. So that's a huge problem that we see with these farms. And even though they're mixing the fish feed with these fillers, there's still, the numbers vary. I mean, it could be 1.5 pounds of wild fish to feed 1 pound of farmed fish, and it could go all the way up to 7 pounds of wild fish to feed 1 pound of farm fish. So the numbers really, really vary. But at the lowest end, it's 1.5 pounds of wild fish to feed 1 pound of farm fish. That doesn't take into consideration the mortality. So I had said that there's up to 15% mortality. So then you have to also factor in, so these fish aren't even surviving, and you're taking these wild fish out of the ocean and really hurting local ocean ecosystems and local human communities.
No, it's so bad.
It is so bad.
And before we get into not allowing this to happen, which is pretty much why you guys exist, you have a page, and you sent it to me too, but there's a page on your website about disasters. And it's horrifying.
Yeah.
Will you talk about some of the disasters and it's just from the past 2 years, 23 and 24 is what I saw.
There's always constant disasters in these farms, and we primarily are looking at the salmon farms because that's the closest system. Even though they're open net pens, they're the closest system in these offshore submerged finfish operations. So, for example, there was a salmon fish farm, and they were trying to deal with the sea lice problem. And so they essentially were trying to vacuum the sea lice off of the fish. What ended up happening is that surrounding herring, which is another fish, herring, they're small fish, their eyes popped out. They were like sucked up. I mean, this is like science fiction in a way. They were sucked into these vacuums. So these herring lost their eyes as a result of this attempt to try to vacuum the sea lice off of the salmon, the farm salmon. Another one is the increase of a liver and kidney disease in farm salmon off of Norway, one of the farms off the coast of Norway that just ravaged the entire farm, the entire CAFO, and it caused high mortality rates because of these diseases that, again, spread like wildfire across the farms because these animals are in such close proximity to each other. Another disaster that we've documented is workers have died on the barges. So the barges have exploded and workers have literally died. This has happened on a few different farms off the coast of Scotland. Something else that's not necessarily a disaster, but it gets back to the issue of the impact that these farms have on the surrounding environment. There was a research done in Hawaii looking at those submerged cages that found that, and this is raising almaco jack, which they market as kona kampachi. So there was research done in, I think it was January of 2024. These scientists discovered that bottlenose dolphins see these cages as FAD. They're feeding aggregated devices. We call them FAD for short. So it's a buffet. The ones in Hawaii has actually changed the behavior of the bottlenose dolphins, where they go and they'll try to pull the fish out of the cages. They have made these bottlenose dolphins loners instead of part of that social community that dolphins are part of. They've also seen that the bottlenose dolphins react with incredible violence towards spinner dolphins if the spinner dolphins come close to the cages, because the bottlenose dolphins don't want the spinner dolphins to get any of their buffet. So these cages are changing the environment of other marine animals around them.
I mean, that itself, first of all, what like a lesson example of like what happens when you give anybody like just too much. Like, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden they get mean and aggressive and greedy. But
Yeah.
also, did the spinner dolphins and the bottlenose dolphins get along before
Yeah.
this?
Yeah. They
Wow.
existed. They existed together. So
Wow.
this is new behavior. This is behavioral changes in the bottlenose dolphins.
What about escapes, like when the fish get out? That
Yeah.
happens, right?
Yes, it does. There was in 2017, Cook Aquaculture had a farm off the coast of Washington State, and hundreds of thousands of salmon escaped. Atlantic. So these are Atlantic salmon that they're raising in waters where they're Pacific salmon, which have been struggling for a variety of different reasons. And Cook Aquaculture had a farm, and there was a massive escapement. And at first, Cook Aquaculture said that it was only, a few hundred or a few thousand. It really wasn't a big deal. But it turned out to be hundreds of thousands. The Lummi people of the Salish Sea in Washington State were picking the Atlantic salmon one by one out of the waters to protect the Pacific salmon. As a result of that disaster, of that escapement, the Commissioner of Public Lands of the Department of Natural Resources, Hilary Franz of Washington State, signed a directive to get all of those net pens out of the water. So she signed a directive to close down salmon farming in Washington State. That directive just went before the entire board of the Washington State Department of Natural Resources. And so we're waiting to see the results. So we're hoping that the board of the Washington State Department of Natural Resources sees that huge escapement as a great concern for the people of Washington State, and they will essentially codify that directive. The other thing to say is that a lot of tribes, there's been some division amongst the tribes, and a lot of the tribes, especially in Washington State and the Pacific Northwest, are salmon people. And so they have a cultural relationship to salmon and a specific respect and identity with the salmon. And so to see salmon being jeopardized because of farming of their cousins, the Atlantic salmon, is just another assault against many indigenous peoples in the Pacific Northwest.
Well, makes sense. So this is like a nightmare that's been being planned for how long?
I was working on this in the mid-2000s, and it's been pursued in the United States, I would say, since like the early 90s. And there is one bill that keeps being introduced into Congress called the Aqua Act. And it's the same bill that I was working on in the mid-2000s, the same bill that was floated around in the 1990s. So it's been for a long time. The industry has really been pushing this for a long time. And so far they have been unsuccessful. My concern is that they did not have the power and the money of some of these entities like Cargill and Merck and Cisco previously. But I also do believe that it is economically going to be a challenge unless there's some huge subsidies. And so the other thing that we have available on our website is the amount of money that the U.S. government has paid in subsidies for research and development and also for some startup costs for pilot projects. For industrial finfish farming. So that's taxpayers' money that is going to support research and development and pilot projects to develop a food system that is based on environmental destruction and greed and disregard for animals, fish, and any of the other marine mammals that might be around it. So those are government subsidies that have been supporting this. You don't see the government money going to look at, how much of these chemicals are being ingested by, let's say, us, the consumers, or how much of those chemicals are being ingested by other marine mammals or animals. So a lot of government subsidies are going in to prop up the industry. And the administration has been a proponent of this industry for decades. Why is a question that I would love to know the answer to. I don't know why. Also, talking about the administration, when Trump was president previously, he had signed an executive order that would essentially streamline the process of being able to get permits to develop these finfish farms in federal waters.
So Trump signed this, though, gave him the go-ahead. And then when Biden was in office, did he take it back?
Nope, we tried.
Oh.
At Don't Cage Our Oceans, we tried to get Biden to repeal it, and he didn't.
Just on a quick aside, because we work with so many people who are on every level of trying to make the world better for animals or the world, the planet. And things will definitely be worse in a lot of ways now with Trump back for animals. But the truth is they weren't very good with Biden. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so this is just like one more example of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, it's still, so the other concern that we have is in this new administration, because of the love for money and the consolidation of money and the increased control of the people, which you do through controlling the food system, and also some articles that we've seen, we're concerned that there's going to be an effort to not only allow for fast-tracking the development of these floating CAFOs, but also allow for the fast-tracking of having them on land in what they call recirculating aquaculture systems, or RAS. And the idea between the recirculating aquaculture systems is that you recirculate the water, it's a closed system, but in reality, when you take those systems and scale them up, they're not recirculating. They still cause a lot of environmental harm. But that's another concern as we're looking at this new administration. Are they going to increase these recirculating, quote, recirculating, which are not recirculating aquaculture systems on land, and the impact that that has on animal welfare, worker safety, and the surrounding environment, and the safety of our food system?
Don't Cage Our Oceans, you're fighting this. You've been fighting this for a very long time. But what does that actually mean, fighting this?
We use a lot of different tools to fight this, to find solutions that, what we're building, what we're creating. So we are engaged at the federal level. We have a bill that was introduced this past summer, in the summer of 2024, called the Domestic Seafood Production Act. And essentially, the Domestic Seafood Production Act would place a ban on offshore fish farms unless there's some sort of regulatory process. But it would ban offshore fish farms, and then at the same time, it would fund sustainable seafood systems. So that means funding infrastructure to support communities that really need that funding to be able to develop their own seafood systems. And if we're talking about both wild seafood systems and low-impact community-based farm systems. So that's called the Domestic Seafood Production Act. And it, of course, did not go anywhere because it was introduced in the summer of an election year. But we are hoping that it will be reintroduced in 2025. And we see a lot of hope for that because there is bipartisan support. There has been bipartisan support. We will continue to fight the Aqua Act as we have been. We were a plaintiff on a lawsuit against the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Out of that executive order that I had mentioned previously, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers created a nationwide permit, which, again, fast-tracked the permit system. So it really didn't matter the unique ecological or social environment that one of these farms would be placed. All you had to do was fill out a very simple form permit request to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We were a plaintiff on a lawsuit against U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for that nationwide permit, and we won just like a month ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So we'll continue looking at litigation as an option. Some of our members, so we have nearly 60 members around the country, and some of our members are a plaintiff on a lawsuit against the against the Environmental Protection Agency for their permitting of one of the proposed sites in the Gulf of Mexico for Vilela Epsilon, which is in the Gulf of Mexico, for violation of the Clean Water Act. So that's still in. So we look at litigation, pushing our DSPA, our Domestic Seafood Production Act, continuing to fight the Aqua Act. And then the other thing that we've been doing, which is a little bit of a shift, is looking at state opportunities. So I mentioned what's happening in Washington State. There's also, over the summer, we brought together state legislators from about 11 different coastal states to talk about what state legislators could do to fight industrial fish farms in their state waters while uplifting and supporting sustainable seafood solutions. So we're really looking at state opportunities. So currently in the United States, Alaska has a ban on finfish farms in their state waters. Washington State currently is going through this process. Oregon State in 2025 there's going to be a piece of legislation introduced into the Oregon legislature to ban fish farms in Oregon State waters. California has a ban on finfish farms that are salmonoid species like salmon and trout, genetically modified species, or non-native species. So California has that ban. So we're looking at more bans. And also to invest in solutions. Maine has several local ordinances that are going municipality by municipality to ban finfish farms and those real coastal waters. And then we're creating an atlas for values-based aquaculture. So the North American Marine Alliance spent a year looking at what is values. What do we mean by values-based aquaculture? And there are 8 different values, which involve like food as access to food, public access to the waters. It includes issues of having the oceans be a common resource for all. So there's a number of different values. And so what we're doing now is taking those base values and building an atlas for all sorts of different users. So it could be chefs, so they know where to go and they have the information. It could be for media folks. And then really important, we'll have resources for practitioners. And so when we talk about this type of aquaculture, we're primarily talking about low impact. So we're talking about mussels, oysters, seaweed. Those are low impact systems, which is economically possible, where you don't need millions of dollars, but you do need other infrastructure. You need to have access to the waters, to the oceans. You need to be able to have access to like the spores if you're doing kelp farming. So there's still that shoreside infrastructure. You need processing to be able to take that product and take it to market. So there's really low impact, accessible types of aquaculture. And so we're really looking to provide more support for the people who want to do that, who want to have their own thriving small business to be able to contribute to their local food system. And so that's another solution that we're looking at instead of just always fighting.
So how can people help? What can they do? I mean, first of all, I think people just need to know the name, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they need to know your name,
Yeah.
but they also need to know what offshore finfish farming is. Like, I had no idea, right, that we're going to put CAFOs in the ocean.
Yeah.
And the awareness is huge.
Yeah.
Like, people need to know about this.
Yeah, people need to know about it. And so, yes, come visit our site, don'tcageouroceans.org, and sign up for our newsletter, and we'll be able to give you more information. Be informed. I mean, I feel like that's, if you sign up for our newsletter, you'll get action alerts and you'll, understand the latest. Don't eat farmed finfish. Finfish, if it's farmed in general, is going to be an environmental disaster.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you so much for this. This was great. This was really great.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
To learn more about Don't Cage Our Oceans, to learn more about Andrianna, go to our website, speciesunite.com. We'll have links to everything. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Species Unite. If you have a spare moment and could do us a favor, please subscribe, rate, review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps people find the show. I'd like to thank everyone at Species Unite, including Gary Knudsen, Caitlin Pierce, Amy Jones, Paul Healy, Santina Polky-Link, Bethany Jones, Hannah Gabrielson, Lorraine Doherty, and Anna Colner, who wrote and performed today's music. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day.